Andrew Huberman in the house. I want to go back to neuroplasticity at a later age in life. Mm-hmm. How much, like, so let's say every year I want to challenge myself to learn something that's harder, or maybe not, it comes easy to me. Maybe it's Spanish this next couple of years and then something else 10 years. The older I get, say 80, 90, 100, hopefully I get there, if I keep pushing my mind to be challenged in that way that's uncomfortable, will that actually help me live longer, or will it hurt me to living a shorter life?
Oh, that's a great question.
I hear people who live in the blue zones around the world, right? Who they kind of have their normal routine, they have their family, they walk up a hill every day, mm-hmm. they eat a certain way, mm-hmm. and they have good community relationships, but I don't know if I've heard them say they're constantly challenging their mind to expand.
I'm pretty confident saying that it's not going to shorten your life. Mm-hmm. Remember that the dopamine system, so dopamine and acetylcholine are the primary triggers for adult neuroplasticity. We know this because there are experiments done by a guy named Mike Merzenich at UCSF, that if you stimulate the areas of the brain that release dopamine and acetylcholine, you can rapidly induce plasticity, like one trial learning, like Spanish today.
Right.
Like fluent in Spanish today,
wow.
which is kind of scary. This is actually the basis of companies that are thinking about inserting wires into the brain and stimulating.
I could be fluent in Spanish today?
In theory, if you stimulate enough acetylcholine and dopamine release while experiencing enough Spanish, you probably have to speak that Spanish. You probably have to read it.
Wow. You could remember it and connect it.
Yeah, it's possible.
It's like Matrix.
It's possible.
It's like I know Kung Fu.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, but it's possible. It's been done in other forms of learning in other studies.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
what's it called?
Well, if you release that, you'd have to actually have an electrode down in your head. I don't know that you want to drill a hole in your skull.
Put something in your head.
You'd have to drill
and
through
put enough dopamine in your.
Remember, the dopamine comes from the neurons that are in there, so you'd be stimulating the dopamine neurons, the acetylcholine neurons, and you'd be probably reading a Spanish script. I will say there are.
Shut up.
Yeah. Well, there are programs happening right now to accelerate language learning through implantable electrodes.
No way. It's already happening?
It's happening.
Someone's done it before?
It's happening now.
They're testing it now.
I don't think they're at 1 day for fluency, but they are definitely at massively accelerated language learning.
Really?
Yeah. I have close friends that do this sort of thing for a living.
You know someone who's done this?
Who run the laboratories who do this kind of thing. Absolutely.
So what do? They put something in your head?
Well, the goal, so we know that dopamine and acetylcholine, from experimental already published results, if those are released, then in massive amounts, whatever you pair that release with, whatever sensory experience, massively rewires the brain according to that experience. So Merzenich has these beautiful studies where he showed that if you play a certain auditory tones and you stimulate these brain areas, the auditory cortex, the area of the brain that listens and hears and understands sounds, massively rewires according to what was played in that moment. But because these neurochemicals are like gates, they open the gate to plasticity. You normally engage them by focus, agitation, stress and strain, self-reward, etc. Or going to, and having a conversation in Spanish where you're like, wow, I'm doing it.
I'm fluent.
I'm doing it. That's going to keep you. I get it, right? But you can imagine there are groups on this planet that are very interested in rapidly accelerated language learning that would be willing to put many millions or billions of dollars, probably not billions, toward programs to get massively accelerated language learning by putting either implantable chips in the brain that will stimulate these brain areas, including memory areas, or stimulating acetylcholine or dopamine.
So
release.
People have already done this where they cut open their head and put a chip in their brain.
These are neurosurgery patients who are already undergoing surgery for other reasons and have agreed to be part of the study.
This?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and there are animal studies doing this all the time.
Shut up.
Absolutely.
And are there any results of this?
Well, they're not. The groups that are doing these sorts of things are not going to reveal the results just yet. So you can imagine that these are related to, these are government military type contracts. It makes sense, right? You'd want to do this. Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely happening overseas too. I mean, massively accelerated learning is kind of the holy grail of neuroscience, right?
Right. How can we learn anything faster?
Right.
Because time is the thing that we're all trying to maximize.
Right. And, and you could imagine that because the human brain in development can be biased toward becoming exceptional at math or exceptional at athletics. I mean, you could build brains that are You could bias brains to be very, very good, even exceptional at the level of surpassing all previous behavior by triggering these sorts of plasticity events. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't run out and put the chip in your head immediately. I mean, this stuff has to be worked out. But there's a whole community that's spinning up right now around nootropics, smart drugs.
Right.
It's not a word or an area that I'm really a big fan of because, like, what are you talking about? Creativity, task implementation, focus. Like, the word smart drugs is terrible. Nootropics is even worse because it's not pointed enough. It doesn't illustrate exactly what the end goal is. It's sort of a throwaway, catch-all kind of like smart drug. Like, what is smart?
Right.
So, but there are, for instance, I know a Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist who chews immense amounts of Nicorette each day. He's in his 70s because it increases his focus. He quit smoking, which stimulates nicotine, and those stimulate acetylcholine. So Nicorette is a nicotinic stimulant and nicotine is acetylcholine receptor. So his goal is to continue to learn in his old age by stimulating the nicotine pathway. So
really?
Yeah, I choose nonstop nicotine. Now, I'm not recommending people chew Nicorette. I want to be clear. I'm not a doctor. I don't prescribe anything. I'm a professor, so I'm professing things. But there are things like choline, alpha GPC, that will stimulate acetylcholine release and will allow you, in theory, to learn quicker and better in a bout of learning. So
to give you more focus under adversity.
They will trigger the plasticity event to be, it's like carving that knife in deeper, but then you need a corresponding increase in the amount of rest in order to make sure that those pathways get better. Think about it like going to the gym. I actually have seen these guys in the gym in LA where they've got electrodes on the muscles.
Yeah.
So they're maximally recruiting motor units, but then you need that much more recovery because it's unusual to get those high threshold motor units.
So you need to rest for 2 days. You can't go back to the gym tomorrow.
Right. And a lot of these guys are also drug assisted to the point where you can almost smell it from across the room.
Right.
But that's another story.
Yeah.
But that whole area is geared around maximum stimulus, maximum recovery. Maximum stimulus, maximum recovery. So drugs, supplements can accelerate these processes. A fun one from sports, because it should have been the Olympics this year, but the sprinters have their own drug community. It's not just the anabolics. Those sprints are won by who gets out the blocks fastest. That's reaction time. And there's lore, I'm not involved in this, but there's lore of sprinters taking drugs to accelerate nerve transmission by focusing on the gun. It's all about hearing the gun and getting out the blocks. So they take drugs to stimulate dopamine and acetylcholine because that puts you into faster reaction, more focused, faster reaction.
So is that activating the adrenal receptors so you react quicker?
It's actually happening at the neural level, and it's allowing them to hear the gun as it's going off.
And not hear it after the fact.
That's
react.
right. Because you can lose by being the last person out the blocks.
Yeah.
Most of those drugs are illegal, but there's a whole world of drugs in sports that are geared around the mental side and focus and the ability to get into sleep. I mean, you can bet, given now the understanding that sleep is so fundamentally important for performance, people are hacking sleep like crazy. Chili blankets, magnesium, theanine, certain things that I think do work. People are wearing Whoops and Oura rings, and it's all about sleep now, right? It's all about sleep because it's so powerful. And
sleep is the ultimate drug.
And people are now developing drugs that will allow people to fall asleep and sleep better, function better on less sleep, optimize the amount of slow wave sleep time. Anyway, it's a whole world. I'm fascinated by it because it's the extreme of the things that we're talking about. But for the typical person, behaviors are the way to go.
Behaviors.
And nutrition is not an area of my expertise, but incidentally,
the body is connected to the mind.
The body's connected to the mind.
And if the body doesn't have good gut health and good nutrients, then it's going to be affecting the way you think and the way you feel and the way you act eventually.
Absolutely.
It's going to be harder and harder if you don't have energy.
Right.
And food and nutrition gives you proper energy.
That's right.
Or it takes the energy away from you.
That's right.
It depletes you from energy. So the older we get, it's harder to expand our neuroplasticity, but that's why we should be learning new challenging things every year is what I'm hearing you say, to help us.
Yeah.